the unveiling of the company of heaven. Every man and every woman is a star.
Radical Media Podcast. I am one of your co-hosts, Eric Scott Picard, joined as ever by Patrick Ryan.
How's it going, everyone?
And today we have got a two-parter for you. The first part, which will be on this week. The second part will be on next week. This first portion, for the first segment, we're going to be joined by a Cleveland artist named Charles L. Gilchrist. So let me read you a little bit about Charles. Charles Gilchrist was born in Wichita, Kansas in 1940. Showing artistic talents at an early age, Gilchrist started his formal education at 11, studying under well-known portrait and landscape painter Genevieve Ingram Frickle. He later attended Beloit College and the Cleveland Institute of Art. He has worked in many mediums, including commercial photography, acrylics, new mediums, and in addition to his artistic life, he has conducted workshops on sacred geometry. So we're going to talk a lot about sacred geometry. You should definitely visit his website. I'd recommend doing that now and taking a look at some of his artwork before you listen to the rest of the broadcast. His work with mandalas, for example, and prayer wheels is incredible. So we're going to talk about a lot of things with Charles. Charles, welcome to the program.
Oh, I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
So Charles, tell me a little bit about, it seems like you realized that you wanted to dedicate your life to art at a very early age. Tell us a little bit about your background and your journey toward doing what you do now.
Well, it did start when I was very, very small. I started drawing and making the images I was copying. So that's kind of unusual to start that really early. And by the time I was 3.5 years old, I was totally convinced that I had been given some kind of gift, some kind of artistic gift, and I believed that it was. I believed that the purpose for that was to do something. I saw it as an assignment, kind of like the deity, God, if you will, had blessed me with this talent, and I was supposed to use it for some mysterious spiritual purpose, although I had no idea exactly what that was. But I was aware of that when I was very, very little. That's kind of unusual.
Sure, it was kind of like almost like a calling.
That's the way it felt. It definitely felt like it was kind of like an impression of destiny. I don't know. I didn't know any of those words or anything, but I did feel it.
Is there a particular experience that you could refer back to that you felt sort of sparked it, or was it just an underlying feeling?
No, that's a good question. That's a really good question. Yeah, I can tell you a little story. My parents, this was in the 40s during the war. My parents lived in Wichita, and that was the center of the war effort, because all of the airplane manufacturers were there in the city. It was very heavily involved in the production of aircraft for the war effort. And my father was a very shrewd person. He bought this house, or they bought this house. It was a kind of a rundown old Victorian house, and his plan was to refurbish it and then sell it to one of the troops that came back from the war. So he was completely absorbed. Both my parents were completely absorbed in rebuilding this house, and I just was kept busy drawing. And it was good for them because they didn't have to worry about me. They just put me, they put me in front of the sun and just let me go. And I was a babysitter, So there was one particular night. It was in the winter. I remember this very clearly. It was in 1943, and my father had built this little desk out of an orange crate, and I had this little wicker chair, and I was sitting in this wicker chair, and I was sitting next to a coal burning stove, which was in the dining room, and my parents were papering the kitchen in the kitchen, and I had decided for the first time to draw something from memory. It was the first time I ever did that, and that's why it was so important, because it was the first time I tried to look into my own memory and draw something from memory. And I decided to draw a truck, because the street that we lived close to was a very heavily trafficked street, and there was all kinds of trucks that went up and down that street. So I knew what trucks looks like, and I was convinced that I could draw this truck from memory. And and I started. It was the first time that I actually looked into my own internal self, if you understand what I'm trying to say. Mm. And so I was drawing this yellow truck on this piece of paper, and I started with a line on the bottom, and then I drew the body, and then I put the wheels. And when I saw the wheels in my mind, I saw two wheels in the back and one wheel in the front. So I was thinking about a tractor trailer kind of a rig, but I was trying to draw a pickup, and there was an error there, and I knew there was an error, but I couldn't really grasp what I had done wrong. And this fire was burning in this coal burning stove, and I looked into this fire, and suddenly I saw the coals there. It looked like there was something alive in there that was waving to me, and it was like a visionary kind of experience, a mystical kind of experience. And these fire creatures, whatever they were smiling at me. They were encouraging me, and that was kind of new. So I started to get this kind of like hyper sensitivity. First time that I ever experienced that. And I was looking around the room, and the room was everything in the room seemed alive. There were people, beings on the walls, in the chairs were alive. Everything was alive. It was very potent, and that's when I realized that I had that this is what I was going to do for the rest of my life. That this is what I was born to do. So it was a really potent experience, very, very powerful experience. And it was kind of like you could say it was a peak, for sure, a peak experience that influenced me for the rest of my life, basically. So that's
So it was like this is your founding moment of self-awareness.
Yes.
Yeah,
I think so.
I guess that's really like the artistic impulse itself comes from a realization of the self, and also of the self's place in the rest of the universe. Correct?
Yes, that's what happens. Kind of a realization that this is what I'm going to do. That's kind of unusual. That's pretty unusual, actually, I guess.
Well, it's funny because I've researched and read up on other people that use sacred geometry or do art involving sacred geometry, and it seems that all of them in their history, they have this sort of, like you said, this sort of peak experience that kind of takes them above into like a deeper form of art, as opposed to just doing standard art all of a sudden they start to see the world as sort of as alive, and they're able to express that through the artistic medium. So it seems to me that it's an experience that's shared amongst many people that do the whole visionary, quote unquote, element of art.
I think so. Although I didn't know that at the time, of course. And my parents weren't that happy about the fact that I was an artist. They were very conservative. It was a very Calvinist kind of background, and my parents were very conservative kind of people, and they weren't too happy about the fact that I wanted to make art. They tried to bend me away from it, but by the time I got to be, they tried to influence me towards other areas of expression. Like I took piano lessons, I took dance lessons. They did everything to try to get me away from fine art, but it didn't really work. By the time I was 11, they pretty much decided that, well, he's going to do this anyway, so they might as well, get him a teacher. And that's when I had my experience with Mrs. Frickel. She was a great teacher, and I was the youngest student that she ever took at that time. And she really taught me how to draw. She taught me how to see, actually. That I wasn't really sure. I mean, I had kind of forgotten that spiritual calling that I first felt when I was 3.5, because I got trained out of that kind of stuff. Or, talking to people who weren't there and having visions and that kind of stuff was not cool in my family. So I kind of hid that, and they kind of made me feel guilty about being a little mystic, So I went into Sunday training like everybody. I really wasn't the child that my parents had imagined when they were, before I was born. I was a handful. I was difficult. So what can I say? It was a challenge. But I suppose you want me to tell you how I actually got into sacred geometry eventually, huh?
Right. Yeah, that was actually going to be my next question. How did you transition just from the typical form of art to incorporating sacred geometry?
Exactly.
Well, I think that it all went back to that original experience, which was really a self-investigative experience. That the thing in the orange crate when I was 3.5. I was searching inside my own head for inspiration, basically. And when I got into high school, my parents moved. My father was transferred. He worked for International Harvester Company. When we were transferred to the Chicagoland area, and when we went there, I went to school in this brand new high school in Rich Township High School in Park Forest, Illinois, which is a suburb on the far south side of Chicago, still there. And they had a brand new building there, a brand new high school, and it had a fantastic library. And I got introduced to the Surrealists. You know the Surrealist movement?
Sure, yeah.
Well, the thing about the Surrealists is they're also looking inside their own head. They're studying, dream imagery, and they were interested in psychology, psychiatry, and what was actually going on inside your being, which really appealed to me naturally. And when I fell in love with the Surrealists, and I started to mimic them and follow them and study them, and I basically that was the serious area for me at 13, 14 years old, and that basically was the direction that I took for that's basically the direction I've taken for the whole time. I believe that the Surrealistic movement was the principal movement, the principal artistic movement, or a painter's movement in the 20th century, because it was the first time that artists were really en masse, really looking inside, really becoming transcendental. And I believe that was like the kind of like the cusp, that energy that the surrealists felt was kind of like the cusp of what's going on now. It was like the beginning of the Renaissance to towards self-investigation, self-knowledge, and if you understand what I'm trying to say. And so I went to Cleveland. I went to Beloit College in Wisconsin, and then I dropped out of that. I started racing cars for a while. I decided I want to be a driver, and I got really close to being having to choose whether I was going to be a professional race car driver or not. And,
that's a pretty incredible story. Yeah, I was reading about that in your bio.
Yeah, it was a very interesting story, and there was I had an offer from some guys who ran cars out of the Chicagoland area, and they wanted me to go full-time racing with them in the USAC circuit. They wanted to build a midget car and have me go for the national championship in I was in early 61, something like that. I was 21 and I was very happy about doing that. And only they wanted me to go pro. They wanted me to just, and I knew what racing was all about, and it was like a full-time 24-hour a day dedication you had to have to be successful, and I had to make a choice, and I realized that no, I can't do this. I'm really an artist. I've got to be an artist, and I bailed out of that, and that's when I went to art school here in Cleveland, Ohio, at the Cleveland Institute of Art, and then I got married. I had a couple of babies. I couldn't make a living as a fine artist, and so I decided that I would become a photographer, and so I basically bullshitted my way into my first job as a photographer, and then and I made a decent living, and I became a commercial photographer. I rose in that whole system, and I was I was paying for everything, but at the same time I was also making art on the side, serious art, all surrealistic art at the side, on the side, my own time. I was also doing serious photography at the time, so I have this I have a tremendous amount of experience in the photography area, and but drawing and painting I was also doing that by myself, and I didn't suspect that anybody would ever be interested in buying my surrealistic work. I mean, it's not exactly the kind of thing that you hang in most houses,
Yeah.
So would you say your surrealistic work was it similar to the stuff you're doing now with the mandalas and the sacred geometry and such, or did it have a differing character from it?
No, I could tell you the story that was the bridge there. That's what I was trying to get to. There was a bridge from surrealism into spiritually oriented work, which is actually mandala making and meditation, things like that. In 1970, when I was 30 years old, I realized that the photography was getting to be a major part of my life, and I wanted to make sure that it was kind of like a rebirthing experience, and I started having a lot of memories. That's when I remembered the experience that I had when I was a baby, and how spiritually oriented I was, and so I went back to art school at night when I was 32, and I went to night school 5 years and graduated from the Cleveland Institute of Art out of the night school program. And at the daytime I was a photographer, and by night I was an art student. And I continued to develop my artistic abilities, my skills, and I kept working on surrealistic work and dream imagery. And in the late 70s, I discovered this experience of what I call open-eyed meditation. And I already had a lot of experience with meditation, and the 70s were very challenging, and I discovered transcendental meditation which was introduced to this in this country by the Maharishi Yogi, and you probably know about the transcendental meditation movement. So I got into meditation, and I started becoming more and more interested in the spiritual world, and my surrealistic work started taking fanciful kinds of figurative work, and I also was growing as a photographer, and until I finally got by the highest level I rose in the photography area was I became became a senior executive for a company called the May Company, which was a chain of retail stores. And I had a tremendous amount of responsibility and a lot of pressure doing this commercial work. And there was a certain point where I just said, well, this is it. I've had it. I'm not going to do this anymore. This is not what I'm supposed to do. And I bailed out of the commercial photography world, and I decided to put a lot more energy into full-time fine art, and that's where I started. So when I retired, when I quit the job, which shocked everybody, I had a studio. I had a loft, a 2,000 square foot loft in an old warehouse building in the downtown area, and I had saved a bunch of money. By this time I was divorced, by the way, and I was living in this loft, and I decided that I would analyze all this work that I had been doing for the last about 12, 13 years, this surrealistic work, and figure out what I was going to do next. And so I tacked all this. I stuck all this work up on the walls, and I started studying to find what was consistent about it. Was there some kind of message that was coming through this work that was a clear direction? And when it didn't take me about a month of contemplation, and finally I saw, wow, these things are all loaded with geometric imagery and numbers. And so immediately I got interested in numerology. I discovered the world of mandala. I started studying about mandala and the history of mandala, and I started studying numerology. And when I found mandala and the relationship that it had to meditation and to this introspective kind of approach, in combination with my abilities to create these open-eyed meditational states, like trance states, while I was working, and letting this imagery flow through me, I applied that same kind of technique into the process of creating mandala. And once I started that, then by that time I was 41 years old. That was in 1981. I knew when I got there. I said, "Oh, this is it. This is what I was looking for all these years." And I just blew up in my appreciation of what I had discovered. I got really, really excited about it. I got so excited about it, I started talking to people about mandala and geometry and numbers and things like that, and they thought I was totally, completely mad.
I'll tell you what, that is so fascinating, incorporating number and mathematics into the sort of surrealist style art.
I don't think it's so far. I don't think it's so far away from. I mean, people think it's a big jump, and I don't think it's a big jump because it was just a deeper level of the transcendental. I mean, I had been studying all kinds of people like Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell and the Maharishi Yogi and all this spiritual information that was happening in the 70s and you know, had influenced me. And I don't think it was a big jump. I think it was a perfectly natural jump because I was already aware that I was working with archetypal imagery. I had gotten in so far into my own subconscious realm that I was expressing ideas which were kind of like collective archetypes rather than personal archetypes, if you know what I'm trying to say.
Right.
Like kind of like tarot card imagery, you know, where it's symbolic imagery, which wasn't exactly personal dreams. It was more like a deeper level of my own transcendental, you know, musings. So it doesn't seem like a big step to me, a big jump. It was a natural jump as far as I'm concerned.
You know, it reminds me a little bit of, or at least as far as like the number and mathematics you were talking about, it reminds me a lot of, you know, I've read through Da Vinci's notebooks, and Da Vinci had this whole idea of making a science out of art and an art out of science. And, you know, he was very big on, you know, looking at nature and looking at the human body and whatnot and finding sort of like a mathematical, almost Platonic symmetry to everything and incorporating
it wasn't almost. He was deeply into it. But you see, at that point, I had not discovered the history of sacred geometry. But I saw the perfection of it. I saw the archetypal levels of geometry before I ever realized that there was a whole history of sacred geometry. So I got into through pure the love of the circle itself, which is what mandala means. Mandala is a Sanskrit word which means circle, and the center of the circle is called the bindu, which is another Sanskrit word. So the combination of the center of the circle and the circle itself was what I started with when I started making mandalas. And what I did was I divided the circle into parts, and I mused on the numerological mathematical reality of the circle in 2 parts, a circle in 3 parts, a circle in 4 parts, a circle in 5 parts. So it naturally created geometric divisions there, and I did a series of mandalas. The first really serious group of mandalas I did was in the 80s. It took me 8 years to create this series of 10 mandalas, which were called the Talking Number Suite, and they were all mathematically oriented towards the division of the circle and the math of that, and my open-eyed techniques were serving me well because I felt as if I was being guided. I felt when I got into these states of these kind of meditational states when I was working with these ideas, I felt like I was being guided by some higher force towards the completion of the mandala. Sometimes I would feel like I would find myself floating on the ceiling, watching myself draw, wondering who was actually drawing. You know,
it's a deeply spiritual process.
Yeah, that very meditational, very very meditational experience. And then when that was finished, I decided to give up the commercial work. I mean, I still had been doing some commercial work on the side, but just to keep the doors open. But it was only stuff that I wanted to do. And by the time I got to the late 80s, I decided, okay, this is it. I'm giving up. I'm gonna, starve to death or make a living as a fine artist. And I moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, because there was two places that I was interested in. One of them was India, which I thought was really impractical, because that was definitely a center of mandala work. But then also the Native American peoples had also been making mandala forever.
Sure.
And so I went down to live in Santa Fe because I wanted to get next to the Native peoples and find out what they were doing with the sand painting and all that business. And so I did that. I retired altogether. I pulled up stakes. I moved everything to New Mexico, and I started painting down there. And I was in right away. I got involved with 4 different galleries down there, and I started to sell paintings. And I figured I was on the right path. And at the same time, just about the same time, I finally discovered this whole tradition of sacred geometry, and that just blew me up again. Because when I found that that blew me away.
I think it's fascinating, Charles, that so many cultures, right, around the world throughout history, have resonated so much with what we would call sacred geometry, or even just mathematics.
Yes.
Mathematics has always been so vital to the process of human intellectual evolution.
Yes,
And
it's true.
I wonder, like, what are your feelings about it? Like, is it simply that human beings are hardwired to recognize mathematics and certain mathematical patterns? Is the universe itself hardwired to recognize certain mathematical patterns?
Well,
is this just a human illusion, or is there really something deep behind it?
Well, I believe that's a really good question. That is an excellent question. Not too many people have ever asked me that question, but I believe that I believe in the Jungian concept of archetypes existing within everybody's psyche, and also too this whole business of this whole holistic movement that's happening now suggests that we already know everything if we could only tap into it. So, and the process of meditation led me into that process. So the process of meditation, while you're making art, was a very consistent part of mandala making, and this has come up in every single society that there's ever been, especially the native societies. They all work in this circle. They all have relationships to geometry, spiritual relationships to geometry. The Native Americans are like a perfect example of that. They're so into the 4 corners. I mean, one of my best teachers was a Lakota shaman named Black Elk. Do you know his work?
It sounds very familiar, but I can't visualize it.
Well, there was a man who, I mean, also too, the shamanic tradition. You see, I also had guidance towards my personal study, my personal investigative study, and it was suggested to me that I should study all the great religions and philosophies of the world, and the goal was to perceive the consistencies in all these different societies, and the catchword was the perennial philosophy. I was looking for the truth that showed up in all the great faiths and all the great philosophies. What was consistent about it, And so the perennial philosophy was deeply the quest towards the perennial philosophy was in the middle of all this. And so when I found mandala, I found a perennial philosophy, basically. If you understand what I'm trying to say.
Right, absolutely.
So then when I discovered sacred geometry, of course, I knew that I was really on the right track, and I continued to develop my abilities, and I used and the other really clear thing is that when I discovered sacred geometry, I realized that the scientists are telling us, they do tell us, that the entire universe is a waveform phenomena, and then it's all in flux, and so nothing stays the same. It all has a life and a death. Even this world that we're riding around on, eventually will freeze when the sun goes out. Which is inevitable. So even that is not forever. But when I discovered the sacredness of geometry through mandala, I said, aha, this is something that you can count on. This is forever true. Pi, phi, these magical archetypes of geometry and mathematics are absolutely unchanging archetypes of the universe. Something that you can absolutely count on as being forever.
Almost
you understand what I'm trying to say?
Reminds me of the whole Platonic idea, or the realm of eidos, as Plato said. These sort of
absolutely. Well, that was what was really beautiful about studying history. When I finally got into sacred geometry, I realized that all these masters over the years were deeply involved in this, and it was never in any of my teachings ever.
And why do you think that is? Why do you think that the modern Western approach to art and mathematics, why do you think we've lost that? Why do you think there's even a separation between the two?
Well, that's a really good question. I think obviously one of the major problems that we have is that we're completely out of balance towards the and we have created a male-dominated worldwide society based on materialism, and there has been, but not from the very beginning, but there has been a definite war between the science and the spiritual realities. The Catholic Church was especially disgusted with mathematical ideas. The Earth is not the center of the universe. You know what I mean? I mean, it is, but it isn't. We aren't. The sun isn't. We are not the actual center. We're only one of the centers.
Sure.
You know what I'm trying to say?
Sure, absolutely. And it almost reminds me of like this sort of philosophical Cold War that went on between Aristotle and Plato. It's like we have the inner visionary realm and we have the outer materialistic realm. But I think we're reaching the point now where we're realizing that it's not a one or the other thing. You can reconcile both of them.
I would like to add something right here, which I think is like the critical point. What's going on right now is we are at the very beginning of a completely new renaissance. If you know what I'm trying to say, there is an awakening. There is an expansion of consciousness going on a worldwide basis. We are literally at the beginning moments of a serious renaissance, and it's very similar to the Italian Renaissance, if you want to look at it from that point of view, because some people believe that the Italian Renaissance happened because a Greek scholar became friends with some Middle Eastern pundits, and they turned him on to some esoteric writings in Arabic, and he translated them into Latin, and those translations, some people believe that those translations are what triggered the Italian Renaissance, and at the same time, at the very same time, during this period, we had the invention of the printing press. Now, before that, you had to be extremely privileged or else involved in the church, various churches, in order to even see a book, let alone own a book. All the books were hand copied, and they were very expensive, and practically nobody, except for the very wealthy and the very privileged, had access to books. So it was basically an illiterate world. But when the Italian Renaissance hit and the invention of the printing press happened, that suddenly the slightly mobile kind of craftsman kind of people had enough discretionary income to be able to purchase a book. So for the first time in the history of the world, books were being printed, and gigantic amounts of information spread all over Europe, especially in
higher
Europe.
dissemination of information. We're having
Right.
the same thing now with the internet.
That's my point. The point is that the internet has become the equivalent of the invention of the printing press. Suddenly, you can get any information you want to if you look hard enough.
It is equally, if not more important than the
exactly
printing press. Yeah.
Exactly. So this and here's the thing. You see, all these seekers out there. Probably the people that are listening to us right now. There's many people out there that are seeking for truth and understanding the real nature of the universe. And I believe that the key thing about that is this holistic reality, this reality of oneness, this reality that we are all in fact connected to the entire universe, and it's not separate. We're not separate. And that perception is I think is the root core of what's actually going on right now. This Renaissance is about the holistic reality, and the thing about sacred geometry, the sacred geometry is the bridge maker. Okay, number one. Most of the vast majority of people that are really interested in the sacred geometry are not interested in the mathematics particularly. They feel it. They can feel something about it. It's they're being intuitively drawn to these forms. And it's satisfying them in a strange, interesting way. And a very small percentage of the people go very far into the mathematics side of it. But here's the point. Here's the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is that sacred geometry, on the one side, it appeals to our intuitive sensibilities, but then on the other side of it, it appeals to the beauty of the mathematics, the perfection of the mathematics, the foreverness of the mathematics and the forms are undeniable. So it appeals to our rational capacities, and it also appeals to our intuitive receptive possibilities. So it's a naturally balancing reality between the so-called feminine and the so-called masculine. Here is a link between these two warring factions that we've always been living with, you know?
Right, exactly. And I've often contemplated that, as not just with the art, but just what we're going through in general right now in this era. But the sacred geometry art definitely articulates it, at least visually. It's this synthesis of the rational and intuitive, of the feminine and the masculine. It's like this sort of, we're entering into this sort of alchemically synergistic age. And I think, most definitely, the sacred geometry art is what will, personify or articulate it.
That's right. And the other thing too is like the core archetype of sacred geometry is the single point. That is the first archetype of sacred geometry, the single point. And the single point is the geometric expression of this thing that we're all trying to realize, which is the holistic reality. So at the heart of the movement of this Renaissance is this holistic reality, and at the heart of sacred geometry is this holistic reality. So, I mean, it's so perfect. It's such a perfect addition, and such a perfect bridge between everything. I mean, there isn't one single thing in the universe which cannot be contemplated by studying sacred geometry. I mean, sacred geometry is literally connected with everything that's going on, everything. Waveform phenomena, everything.
And I think you're right. You know, the word whole or holistic is really the perfect word for it, because it's like when I look at, say, you know, postmodern art, and I don't want to knock on postmodern art too much here, but there's sort of a, you know, this whole idea like, oh, art for art's sake, or let's just do, you know, anything's art or whatever. And I mean, I believe that to a degree, and I believe everyone's entitled to their own opinion of what quote unquote art is. But creating something that's symmetrically whole and mathematically whole is just an entirely higher form of experience. At least to me it is, and at least if you look at the actual numbers, it is. You know.
Yeah.
And
so I would like to say something about what you're talking about.
Sure.
As it relates to the shamanic tradition, okay? I studied a great deal about the shamanic tradition, and one of the things that consistently happens is that some person will feel this calling at a very early age, and they will become contemplative and introspective and a little bit strange. So they are not quite the same as the rest of the tribe, and usually they will step away from the tribe, or they will live at the edge of the tribe, and sometimes they will even go out into the wilderness and live all by themselves in a cave someplace, and contemplate their navel or whatever they're contemplating until the light goes off, and when the light goes off, they say, aha, now I have something for the tribe. And the shaman becomes an intermediary between the spiritual reality and the necessities of everyday life. So, like for instance, Black Elk, one of the major things that he did in his life was to create rituals, geometric, kind of like performance art, where he would create rituals which would teach the tribe about their place in the universe, and that is essentially what native people's construction of art is all about. It's all about serving the tribe, leading the tribe to understanding of the nature of their experience, of being alive.
Sure. So it serves like a healing process almost.
Right. Exactly. So in my experience, when I finished those 10 pieces I was telling you about, called the Talking Number Suite, and I moved to Santa Fe, I had a goal, I had a mission, and it was to bring this information to my tribe, and my tribe is all the seekers out there that are trying to find, sense in this whole thing and how we fit into it. And that is what I believe that an artist's job really is. And I'm not going to put down, the commercialization of fine art, which is exactly what you're talking about. And it all has to do with pop. It's all pop ideas. It's about what's going on right now. What's pop trendy, culture. Right? And exactly, it's a pop thing. So I don't have anything against that at all, except that's not what I'm doing. And when I realized how much healing I was experiencing, how much my consciousness was being expanded by these thousands of hours of meditating on geometric archetypes, I didn't realize how much it was changing me and how much it was healing me. And I realized that it was a responsibility of mine to try to share this. And so I kind of like was forced into becoming a teacher. You understand what I'm trying? So now I'm totally dedicated to the expansion of consciousness, and I'm dedicated to bringing this world of sacred geometry to everybody I can possibly touch. And that's what I'm doing. That's all I do.
It's interesting too. Had you met any other Western artists at the time of your beginning that were doing your sort of brand of art, or did you come on it all by yourself?
I thought I was completely, I thought it was completely unique. No, of course I knew. I realized that there were histories of mandala in the Far East. I mean, I knew there were thousands of monks out there making mandalas, and also native peoples who were making mandalas. But I didn't see there wasn't any particular mandala making going on in the West that I know of. And people they truly did think I was completely mad. And I am out of the box. I mean, I am not connected with the modern commercial art world hardly at all. I don't show in any galleries. It's not for me. And I just share this information through. I realized that the internet was a big deal. I realized that was my equivalent of the printing press, and here I am. I'm just like this little guy living in Lakewood, Ohio, and I have touched like I don't even know how many thousands of people because of my work on the internet and because of my workshops and conversations like we're having, and that's the way I do it.
That's the beauty of it all. It's like in this day and age, we don't need the establishment to support our artistic endeavors, or not, at least not as much as we had to a couple decades ago. And, as time rolls along, we're just gaining more and more independence, and the artist is getting more and more power. And it makes you wonder, what do you think will happen to quote unquote trends or genres as time rolls on? If everyone's able to express their own perspective of what art is, it makes you wonder, it could go one of two ways. Will it all sort of converge into one, or will it all just be, totally unique and totally separate, or maybe a combination of the two?
That's a good question. I think that I think that I could speak a little bit about some of the students that I've had. One of the things that I experienced when I first started talking about sacred geometry, I didn't have the language. I didn't have the language to try to communicate it to anybody. And I would start to say, but George, you got to get into this. This is fantastic. And I would go off, and they would go like, well, wait a minute. I didn't realize this, but I have an appointment I have to be to right now. So I got to go. I'll see you. And they would split, because I was just warping everybody's brain. And I said, wow, this is not easy to teach. This is not easy. And so I started to try to find the words that would help people understand what I was experiencing, And I found that if I knew the person and I could find some kind of connection to their own personal history and make the correlation, make the correspondence between sacred geometric realities and what they were actually doing, like say a football player, it's all geometry, you know, like the ball spinning through the air, all the arcs, the plays. It's about geometry and angle, and you know what I'm trying to say?
The fundamental geometry of the universe, sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So when I would find something that somebody could personally relate to in sacred geometry, then their eyes would just light up, you know. And what I've discovered is that they will find a way to use sacred geometry in a whole other way that I never even perceived was even possible. You know, the perfect example of that is my friend and partner and student J. Gabriel Cavazos. He has blown up that. One of the things that I'm finding
because
now
of my influence on him.
There are thousands.
And he has taken geometry and moved it into his background, his energy.
Some of them,
which is all about
and they send me stuff all the time
architecture
online,
and building things.
My Facebook,
you know, and so he's created
this
platform, concept of
my
YouTube, which is something I never would have dreamed of.
My
and
website is a teaching platform. People get a hold of me.
Perfectly aligned
and
with
I know that some of them
my
are very highly
everybody
skilled in terms of draftsmanship, but
find
most of them aren't.
A way to
so what I did right away
and,
when I started figuring
and
this out,
actually
I created
apply
a series of
to their own personal
mandala, sacred geometric graphics, which people can color without the necessity of having to actually draft the shapes. Are you following me?
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So they don't have to do all the math themselves. They can sit down and do the art without having to do all the math and the geometry.
Right. So the trick is that when you start actually hanging out with this, when you actually start coloring this these shapes, you know, putting color into these shapes, there's a thing that starts to happen. You start to become more and more transcendental. You start to become more and more meditational. It starts to move you. And so I created this series of coloring book mandala graphics that are free on my website. And all you have to do is go to charlesgilchrist.com into the sacred geometry section, and you'll find there's a section in the gallery section where you can download these graphics and color these various archetypes of sacred geometry and have the experience without having to have the drafting skills that you normally would have to actually do this.
Oh, that's incredible. You know, Charles, my wife is really into things like that. She's really loves like the, you know, what do they call them, adult coloring books now.
Right.
But she finds it to be very meditative. I mean, you know, she's
there
very
you go.
visual. She's very highly visual, and but
you see, when you see, here's what I think. Here's what I believe. I believe this for a fact. When you hang out with these archetypes, the pristine aspects of sacred geometry, the root archetypes like circle, nature's first pattern, flower of life, seed of life, pentagon, pentagram, Metatron's cube, all the rest of them. When you start to hang out with that stuff, it actually you are hooking your mind up. You are holding your mind and your visual countenance to something which is absolutely timeless, beyond time. This is as close to source, as close to pure source as you can get. And when you hold your mind, to that, it starts opening up parts of your own psychological potentialities that you can't get to any other way.
I feel like when we're placing ourselves in the artistic mindset, we're placing ourselves very, very close to the Godhead.
Right. Exactly. You know? So when you're looking at sacred geometry archetypes, you're looking at a visual manifestation of God mind, literally. Timeless God mind. So that's why I created this coloring book series of graphics, and I encourage everybody to play, just to play and have fun, you know?
Well, if nothing else, people should visit your website simply for that reason, just to, I mean, they can print them out and they can,
they can
experiment, right? I mean, that's a great gift. That's a great gift you've been given people, Charles. That's a great gift.
Hey, I play the universal market, not the New York Stock Exchange. What goes around comes. What goes around comes around. I have survived. Believe it or not, I have survived as a fine artist for all these years. Like it was 1988 when I moved to New Mexico, and I have been a full-time fine artist ever since. And somehow, I have survived, and I'm still doing it, and I don't have a day job. You know what I mean? Somehow, the universe is taking care of me because I'm contributing.
And I think that really that's the core, isn't it? I mean, as long as you are contributing to your species, to your fellow human beings, the universe will take care of you.
I believe it.
I believe that fundamentally. I really do.
Me too. It's proven. It's been proven to me for all these years. So I'm very happy. I'm a very happy and contented person, and I'm going to be. In June here, I'm going to be 76 years old. I feel very alive, very young.
Yeah, great blessings to you for that, sir.
What shape do you think this new paradigm, as far as the sacred geometry goes, how do you think it'll interface with technology in the future?
That's a really good question. Well, that's what Gabriel's doing. That's what we're doing, and with Architu, we are applying this information to a whole new concept of how to build environments, how to build potent centers, potent spiritual centers. And if you look in the history, ley lines and all that business, man has been tuned into these kinds of things forever. Pi ratio ideas and grid ideas and sacred space, sacred sites, and all that business. It's been around forever. Well, it wasn't an accident. The difference was that these people were just infinitely more sensitive than most people are now. So that's what we're doing in the whole Architu business is using the principles of sacred geometry and this perfection in our approach to building very potent spaces, both for living and for centers like spiritual centers, all these kinds of things. We're working on that. We're even using some of the patterns in sacred geometry as laying those grids, laying those energy grids on top of a piece of property, intellectually, from a drafting point of view, to see if there's some kind of particular points where this should happen and that should happen. If you understand what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Fire ratio stuff. Like, for instance, one of the things that's happened is that we live in a 90-degree world now. I mean, all the houses, all the buildings are pretty much dealing with square stuff, and the circle is not even hardly approached, very rarely. And in the Native American traditions, I mean, listen to this one. This is a good one. The very first gatherings of human beings, as far back as you can go, was around a fire.
Yeah,
that's profound.
Absolutely.
It was a circle, and all the rituals happened in circles. That wasn't an accident. You understand?
No, I guess that fundamentally goes back into that sacred geometry. That's a natural organization of people. Natural
exactly
organization of the universe is this cyclical thing.
Exactly. And
I was going to ask, how does that concept of the circle, how would you apply that to, I don't know, are you familiar with like fractal geometry?
Well, yeah, fractal geometry is very interesting because most of the sacred geometry archetypes are fractal-like. I call them single-point fractals. If you understand the nature of the fractal reality, it happens kind of like in spirals instead of out of the center of a circle. So the mathematics, which is called fractal, is extremely interesting, and it's very beautiful. But and the fact that it infinitely reduces and infinitely expands is exactly the same reality of the circle and all the archetypes that happen inside the circle, which are single point fractals. So I use that word, even though I know it might be technically an error, but sacred geometry is literally, in my view, single point fractal, because all of it expands out of a single point and it goes all the way infinitely in and infinitely out. So it has a very lots of consistencies with the conventional fractal mathematics.
Oh, that's
you understand?
That's very interesting there.
Because it's it always seemed to me that there was a missing link between the chaos mathematicians and the chaos fractal geometry and the Euclidean side of things, and it always seemed like almost like these two things, they were like two totally different avenues of doing geometry. But I of course, if you get high enough, gain a perspective holistically enough, you'll obviously realize they're one and the same thing, right?
Well, one of the things that's troubling you is this influence that Newtonian physics has had on our thinking, and it is primarily three-dimensional in its approach to everything, and yet we live in a multi-dimensional universe. That's one of the things that sacred geometry proves to you beyond a shadow of a doubt. It doesn't take long for you to figure out that the two-dimensional realm is a literally a completely different dimension. Literally a different dimension than the third dimension, and the single point is one-dimensional, and there's more and more connections to fourth-dimensional kinds of thinking now. I mean, so we are existing right now. We already have connections with unity mind, which is single-pointedness, which is one-dimensional, and a two-dimensional plane. The two-dimensional plane, which we use in our building blueprints and all the rest of this stuff, which is a literally a completely different realm. In fact, the rules of the two-dimensional realm are not the same rules as the three-dimensional realm, and that could be proven very easily when you start to look into the so-called irrational numbers. I mean, when you find sacred geometry loaded with irrational mathematics, like pi and phi are both irrational proportions, and yet in the three-dimensional realm, those proportions don't work. And so the Fibonacci sequence, for instance, is the three-dimensional equivalent of the phi ratio, which is a two-dimensional irrational relationship. But the Fibonacci sequence is a rational relationship. So when we move in between these dimensions, things change. and you have to look at things very differently. And that's what's happening now with quantum physics, because quantum physics is touching into fourth dimensional realities and very, very strange and interesting phenomena, which don't make the Newtonian, some of the Newtonian scientists very happy. In fact, there's kind of like a war still going on between.
There definitely is. There definitely is. I've seen physics for a while now. There's definitely even we've even talked to radical physicists on the show who talk about this disgruntlement among Newtonian and quasi-Newtonian physicists and cutting-edge physicists that
the really weird thing is that one of the major things is that some Newtonian physicists, of course, are very, very spiritual, very, very spiritual beings. Certainly. And they may even be religious beings, but a large number of very vocal Newtonian physicists are atheists, which just simply doesn't work anymore.
I completely agree with that, honestly, Charles.
And they have to keep justifying this anti-source philosophy, which it just doesn't make any sense. It's just because one of the things that I have experienced and proven for myself is that this Godhead, this God mind, is actually responsive. I mean, it gives us everything we want. I mean, the nature of prayer. I mean, everything we do, all the energy that we expend, all the things we think about and feel and long for, it's a prayer, and the universe responds by giving us exactly what we're holding in our mind. If we are holding in our mind, fear and guilt and hostility and anxiety and warlike concepts, that's what we get in our life. You understand?
I believe that's true. Yeah.
I could even say I know this is true. So I mean that means that the universe is responsive, and it gives us anything we hold in our consciousness. That's why the expansion of human consciousness is such a critical aspect of this renaissance that we're in the middle of. And to make the point again, I believe it's about resolving the war in our own minds, which relates to the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine having a war, internal war. And most of the wars that we're creating on the outside of our experience are all based about the war that's going on internally. And my experience is I have married, so to speak, I have married my own receptive and projective potentialities. And there's no war going on in me between rational thought and mystical thought. No war at all.
Yeah. It's about creating the alchemical union between the masculine and the feminine.
Right. And that's what I believe is the necessity for the future. Is when we start to do that as the standard goal, then then it's a whole different world. A whole different world.
A whole different world indeed, yeah. And that's what we're fundamentally working towards, I think, is a whole different world.
Exactly.
I'm afraid that we're at the end of our time here, Charles.
That's no problem at all.
But it's been a fantastic conversation. As ever, as I've said many times before, I wish we weren't at the end of our time because I could continue this conversation all night.
Thank you.
However, I would like to offer our guest, Charles Gilchrist, an opportunity here to tell us a little bit about where we can contact you and find your work in case people are interested. So why don't you give us some of your contact information?
Well, the trick is to go to my landing page, my website landing page, which is charlesgilchrist.com. If you go to that landing page, you will be able to access my YouTube channel. I have going on 5 million views of my videos, and they're like, there's a lot of them involved with sacred geometry. So you can learn a great deal by watching those that series of videos, which are about 10 minutes long a piece. Some of them a little less, some of them a little more, and that's very popular and very influential. And then my Facebook page is all. You can also access my Facebook page from that same landing page, and then you can go into my website itself, which is very deep, and you can study that forever, basically. So that's the way you can easily, get a hold of me that way.
Excellent.
Hello?
Excellent. Charles, I'd love to have you on the show again because I feel like we could do this any number of times.
Oh, I'd be happy to talk to you about anything you want to talk about.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, well then, we will let you listeners off the hook now from Free Radical Media. We want to give we want to give thanks to our guest Charles Gilchrist. All of that contact information will be linked to whatever source you are listening to us on now, whether it be YouTube or any of the various pages that we are shared by. You can find more from Free Radical Media on freeradicalmedia.net, as well as most social media platforms, including, of course, YouTube and Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, etc., etc., etc. I am Eric Scott Picard, one of your co-hosts for this evening. The other being Patrick Ryan and our guest, Charles Gilchrist. Thanks a lot for listening. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.